Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. It's being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Manifest. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, Angelina trying to help Pete the best she can. Obviously, like, the death date is approaching heavily because it's been 2 extra months, and obviously, in totality, it's like they're supposed to have, 84 days, so their time is running out severely since they've run. I think, at the beginning of the episode, they're like, yeah, you guys have, literally a week left. And so we see that Pete, Jace, and Corey all have callings, and obviously we see that they're both all kind of sweating and kind of dying, much like Zeke. I think even at one point we see Corey puke up some water, so like he's drowning again. So it is a situation that, Angelina turns to, Mick and Zeke, which obviously, Michaela, you can tell, kind of struggling with the new arrangement with Beverly and everything, because Beverly, got confused and scared. And Zeke's powers kicked in again, but this time they manifested themselves a little differently. Now, when he was looking at Beverly, he saw himself. So it is an empath thing, but it's it looks like it's manifest by literally putting him in that even more so by almost visually putting him in that person's shoe. Because he was saying in that moment, he's like, yeah, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know why I was in his house. But he was able to kind of talk to Beverly and say, I'm Michaela's, Michaela is, Evie's best friend, and was able to, calm her down. And once again, even Michaela being like, wow, that's next level, him being able to feel what she's feeling. So definitely leaning into the empath angle. And that actually kicks up more in the episode, because when Zeke and Michaela go to visit Pete, because initially they visit him and he wants to kind of talk about the calling that he had, because they're because the reason why Angelina went to them is because, Zeke is the only person who survived the death date, so maybe he could help in some shape or form. And they kind of help with the calling that Pete has, where he is trying to run somewhere but can't get anywhere, and then all of a sudden there's the giant timer that's clicking down too. So with that, they ended up meeting with his football coach or whatever, and it turned out there was a student in Derek who had overdosed, and apparently Pete had sold. It was Jace, Corey, and them, but only Pete took the fall for it. So, and it's that's a big thing for Pete to not include. But also, Zeke probably understands better than anyone, because him having previously been an addict. I mean, I say previously. There is no previously. It's a continuous struggle. So for obviously last season, Zeke had to confront his past, and obviously it's never the easiest thing. But when they meet up with Pete again, Zeke's powers kick in, and he realizes wait, you're just scared, you're trying to protect someone. But it turns out their coach was the one making them deal, and it's they couldn't tell anyone because they're kids. Who's going to believe them? It's who's to say he wasn't, Pete was I was scared. I thought he was going to kill me or Jace, so I didn't say anything. No one would have believed us anyway. So going to his to confront him at his house was Jace. Corey went there too, all because of the calling, but Corey doesn't want to do things that way. But Jace, I guess it's, because all that his brother went to juvie because of it. So, and after that, that's where a lot of their life started falling apart. So they're kind of where they are and who they are now, kind of because of him. So I'm sure Jace wants to kind of even it up, just because it seems like his attempt at a second chance is basically getting even with everyone that ever wronged him. Once again, it is a thing of trying to tip the scales and the balances in favor of you, and it seems like Jace has been doing a lot to tip the scales against himself in a certain extent. Rather than using this second chance wisely, he's kind of fallen back into old habits, and I think that will be his undoing. We'll see. Like I said, there was hope for Pete and maybe Corey too, because Corey ends up getting shot by Jace because Corey tries to stop him and ends up getting shot in the process. So, once again, just shows you that Jace is just kind of off the deep end, because he doesn't have his brother, but also, even Corey's not on his side. So, Michaela and them had luckily showed up in time, end up helping Corey, but also arrest the coach for all that he was connected to. It's like that's what the clock metaphor was for, because it was obviously the clock for a football game scoreboard, but also timer. But it also was a metaphor for the coach's time. Well, their time being up, but also the coach's time up being up for being the criminal scumbag that he is. So this all does ultimately lead to even Pete finally, I guess, either giving up on Jace or hoping that maybe things can be helped. Like maybe he, it's like, well, I've only got 4 days now left, so all right, I do want to try and do the right thing. Like either he's trying to get his brother brought in because it's like, damn, my bro shot Corey is like now he's kind of further and further deeper off the end. Whatever the case may be, he's trying to tell Michaela like, okay, I have an idea where my brother might be. So there's that. Kind of along those same lines, obviously, like, connected to all that is obviously Olive, her prom is coming up, but she initially doesn't want to go. Because I'm sure, like, they haven't dived into it, obviously, this season much, but obviously they dived into it more last season of Olive kind of feeling more like an outsider and trying to find a place to more so fit in. So, because obviously, like, she wanted to kind of go with TJ, but obviously he's halfway across the world right now. So it's a situation of, like, well, she kind of was like, I don't want to go. Because also, it's like, those aren't really, like, her and her friends probably aren't necessarily on the same page. But then, like, looking through her phone later on, you could tell, like, she was like, all right, like missing out on it. So she decides she wants to go, and I thought it was kind of pretty dope. I was kind of wondering if whether or not Angelina was going to go with her, but I was like, well, it's probably a thing of like, well, I am like 25, so like me probably showing up at your helping, like being your like +1 at your prom. It's like it's almost like I'm just going to be your friend. I'm going to take you there, because obviously she missed out on her prom, so it's like it's making you like. Yours isn't going to kind of make up for the fact I missed out on mine. So just go have fun for the both of us. So it seems instead though she chose to kind of spend her time with Pete. So I think that's kind of filling the void on many different fronts. So I'm curious if that's kind of a still struggle for Olive of like still like considering her family and everything, and especially with the Flight 280ers being back in the news. Maybe she kind of dodges it. Maybe her friends are chill enough not to be D-bags about, so like maybe she's fortunate enough to have a foundation of friends who are like, a group of friends who are just like, she's able to kind of just like have fun and everything without that really coming up, them poking and prodding about that. So there's that side of things. And then another side of the episode is Ben's hand glowing again. Obviously, like, getting a vision, a calling about the plane again. So he calls up Sanvi about his hand glowing. And it's like, all right, let's go meet up with Vance, which they haven't been able to talk to Vance in the past 2 months. So they get dropped off at a facility. Vance's right-hand dude isn't answering any of Ben's questions, but when they show up there, Vance doesn't give the most warm welcome, because it's also because Vance is like, I literally told you to do nothing. Yeah, I appreciate your help, but it's also like you complicated things by interfering, even though I told you not to interfere. The entire time he's kind of getting pissed at Ben. I kept saying out loud, I'm like, in his defense, your wife kind of like made him feel bad and was like, I mean, Ben already felt guilty enough. Your wife kind of sucked the knife in a little deep, was like, nah, do whatever it takes to make this right. So it's kind of, it's like, yeah, you were doing your own thing, but it's still kind of like your wife kind of pushed him to it to make him, guilted him into doing it. So like, at least guilted him even more into doing something. Would he have done something without her? Yes, but her guilt was kind of probably an extra motivating push. So I don't know. Because basically for him, it's like, I would have found a way out of it, but you doing what you did. I mean, because he's like, basically, I ended up having to come back to answer a whole bunch of questions I didn't want to answer. Because he also had to, like, admit being alive and everything by Ben doing what he did. So it's like, you kind of caused me a lot more problems. You put me in this awkward position with the NSA. And now I've got this job and everything. Sure, but this isn't what I wanted. He actually did want to cut ties with them. Because I was wondering last episode whether it was like some big move play where he was, but it's like, no, he kind of just wanted to kind of cut ties with them, but they kind of dragged him back in because it's like, hey, this 828 operation, you get to oversee everything now. So obviously we see that it is the plane. And that was the big thing I kept getting confused because my thing was I thought there was a duplicate plane, like the plane at the beginning of the series that came back and blew up at the end of episode 1. I thought that plane was kind of like a fake, but then they were explaining, like, because as Ben kind of explained this season, the plane exploding, it was almost like the plane hit its death date and died, right? And that's what he was kind of implying. So I thought like maybe the tail fin they found at the beginning was at the beginning of the season, that tail fin was to the real plane that actually crashed and landed in the Caribbean Ocean or something like that. I thought that's what that was, but it's like, no, this tail fin is from this plane. Because the plane that's in front of them is the burnt up plane. But I was like, but then like we find out like the tail fin like teleported like what basically during season 2's finale, and it's like, wait, what? So it's like, okay, but then that kind of that's confusing too, because it's like, well, why the tail fin? Why no other piece of the plane though? Like all the other pieces of the plane stayed here, but that one did. And they find out like, oh, and when it teleported into the ocean, it like basically aged like it was sitting in the bottom of the water for 7 years. The entire time the plane was supposed to, the time of the flight being going, that basically in that the 7 years that the show has been taking place, that when the tail fin disappeared, it seems like it's been in the bottom of the ocean the entire time, even though it hasn't. So once again, it is that thing of when something dies, once the death date catches up, it kind of goes back to its original state. So we're kind of going back on that front. So I was like, that's really interesting, that being the case. So, but now it's this complicated thing too of like, Ben thought like the tail fin is what he was supposed to come see and everything, because like Grace has a conversation with him like, oh, do you really trust Vance? It's like, yeah, I mean, she's like, I get trusting Vance, but he's with the NSA now. It's like, yeah, but Vance has kind of done so much for us. It's like, I don't trust them, but I trust him. And Grace is like, well, I trust you if you trust him. So but it's a complicated thing because Vance is now working with the NSA, so it is a thing of like he's not. I think Ben kind of quickly feels it out of like, oh, like there's not as much goodwill and trust between us, because it's like, well, now you've kind of had to compromise yourself to kind of work here again, and you're overseeing this operation, so you kind of have to go back to kind of keeping secrets from people and stuff like that. That doctor who showed up, that scientist, in fact, showed up, didn't really like, she's kind of the one running kind of thing. Well, as Vance was kind of saying, like, she kind of has been running things her own way for a while. Now it kind of has to shift stuff, because it's like, oh, the passengers shouldn't be anywhere near this plane. We should actually be studying them. But it's like, okay, we're not lab rats for you to kind of poke and prod. But Ben ends up following the mark on his hand, and it leads him to ultimately find Kelly's body. And I was like, wow, that's a flashback. We haven't heard about Kelly in a while. I mean, granted, yeah, she's been dead since like episode 2, sure. I mean, obviously we eventually in season 1 ended up finding out how she died. Still thought that would have ended up being. Now in retrospect, I'm like, it's kind of crazy that ended up not being like the huge mystery you thought it would have been. I thought it would have been like, oh my god, someone's killing 828ers. It's like, well, it wasn't the whole story. It's like the nanny was in love with her husband or something like that, and it's like, I was taking care of them, I was their foundation and their support the entire time, and then she came back taking away what was now my family, what was so important. Like that ended up being like the whole like and that sort of, once again, I'm recapping something from season 1, but it was just like, it just still blows my mind to think like, oh, there wasn't like some necessarily like huge conspiracy necessary, but I guess that in itself kind of was just kind of speaking more volumes of that at the time, and still currently of just like the effect of like, right, people disappearing for 5 years and light popping back regardless. But it turns out like, I was like, oh, Kelly's body's in pretty good condition. I was like, that's interesting. But then it's like, oh yeah, like we all know that Kelly died from a gunshot wound to the head, right? Well, if you look at her body, it seems more like the body of someone who died in an mid-air plane explosion, and it's been and her body's been in the water for the past 7 years. And it's like, whoa, which we know that's not the case. And now, like, that kind of fits more with Ben's narrative that they were resurrected. It's like, we all died in the plane, like, 7 years ago. Like, we all died and something brought us back. And that's where this all comes into place. Once again, like, this balancing the scales and judgment. And like, if you succeed, it's like, hey, you get your old body, like you get like, I guess, a new life, because everyone's living on borrowed time. Like, you're living on like a new resurrected borrowed time, but I guess that time becomes permanent. Once again, Zeke's kind of the trial run of like what that looks like and what that's all about. So he's kind of the poster child of like, so, you know, he's the one you have to study close to be like, so beating the death date, like, what does that necessarily mean? What do you have to necessarily do to it? It's not all clear cut, you know? So, but it does kind of fit Ben's narrative of like, yeah, they were all resurrected by some power or something like, which Zombie's kind of reluctant to kind of go down that route. But for Ben, it's like, what other choice we have? The other interesting thing is that same night, obviously the night that the Tailspin disappeared, like I said, was season 2's finale. So Zeke died and came back again. You know, like he survived the death date. That's also the night the Jace, Corey, and Pete ended up dying. That's also the night the Major ended up dying, which obviously only Vance and Sanvi know that, and she's actually kind of saying that this might be some kind of punishment or something. Like, she's like, the fact is, the moment the Major ends up dying, the Tailspin happens. It's like, yeah, but the Major kind of, it's like, what, you know, it's like, don't, you know, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, essentially. But for her, it's like, it's my connection to the Tailspin and everything, so she feels like she's a kid. Because for her, it's like, my chances of, you know, beating my death date, I kind of screwed that up now. But for her, she feels like, but, you know, what if there are continuous ramifications for it? Because, once again, this is also about tipping the scales and stuff. Like, Sanvi severely tipped the scales against herself. Well, for one, she's not getting the calling, so she's not being able to help to kind of tip the scales. She's not going through the challenges she's supposed to, or she's going through her own challenge because she ended up killing the Major, and I'm sure that's a big no-no on the good place points that she's needed to kind of, you know, come out on the other side of the death date like Zeke, and hopefully like everyone else can too, you know. So, I mean, that Sanvi is going to be the one to look out for too, of like, what's her circumstances going to be like? Is there a way to like reverse that to kind of help her in any shape or form? We just don't know. So Sanvi wants answers, and then obviously, you know, Vance asked the question in the episode. He's like, what I asked you back in Cuba, what are you willing to sacrifice to get answers? Because Ben doesn't want to be he doesn't want to tell them all that they know and everything about them, because he's like, already when him and Sanvi were there, you know, just at first it's like, yeah, they're already looking at us like it's something we need to be, you know, poked and prodded already. They find out any more, this is going to escalate that even more. But Sanvi's willing to stay behind and work there because, you know, the scientist that she is, she wants to understand things, because so many people's lives, it's like probably, you know, understanding all this mystery would end up ultimately helping understand the death date and, like, you know, what to kind of do and how to potentially help everyone with that. There's also Troy, which I even love, like, well, oh, Troy, you're alive. He's like, and not dead? Yeah. It's like, yeah, basically the government abducted me and like they kind of brought me in here. That basically he's the one that's been kind of continuing Sanvi's research with all of this. So it's like, oh, he didn't want to do it. He was kind of reluctant. He's kind of forced to do it. So it's like, hey, you know, but it seems like she's going to be working there. So maybe we'll see Troy from time to time. So that's like hey, you're not dead. That's awesome. Yeah, because we ain't seen you in a hot minute, Troy. It's like, right, because we saw the thing in the replay at the beginning. I was like, all right, poor bastard. And it's like, oh, good. You're okay. Obviously, another angle, since I brought her up, is the Major. Was it Sarah, Catherine's daughter? Obviously, her and Jared have continued to work together this entire time. You know, and obviously he's getting Drea's help, because even Drea's like, she's such a monster. Why are you working so hard to save her if she's such one? It's like, yeah, despite everything, it's like Sarah, you know, just drew the short straw on moms, but you know, it's still like, hey, her mom's a victim potentially, so I need to do whatever I can to help her to get answers. You know, she deserves kind of justice as much as anyone else, despite her circumstances, you know, of what the Major did and everything. So, but Jared's looking deeper and deeper into things. He ended up finding out about like the sanitation truck, and it's like, oh, why was it in another area? Because it was part of like a noise complaint thing. And then he actually looked into it, and it turns out, oh, they don't pick up, the sanitation trucks don't pick up stuff in that area at that time, and it's like, that's like Vance and them calling in people to kind of, dispose of the body and everything, and it's like, right, because still the only people who know are, the NSA knows, but Vance and Sanvi, Vance still hasn't, we don't know if him and Sanvi have been able to meet subsequently for him to talk to her about the whole, because she didn't ask any questions, so either he automatically told her, or maybe like after last episode, like at some point in that 2-month period, she ended up talking to him about it. But like Ben still doesn't know, like, her body was found in, like they revealed last episode, her body was found in New Orleans. Like she was like, what? So obviously Jarrett's kind of getting closer and closer to it, because Vance's dude is following. It's like, Vasquez is getting super close to finding out the truth, and it's like, well, what do you do on this? Because eventually it's all going to lead back to not just you guys, but also Sanvi, because Sanvi's the one who actually killed her, so that's going to turn into a whole complicated. I think that might be where Sanvi's story goes, because obviously this stuff about scales and kind of, reckoning with the past and stuff like that. I think Sanvi's probably going to try and turn herself in to be like, I need to do this, I have to make this right, because, it is a thing that is still haunting her and she feels guilty about. It's more so from the front of like, at first, I'm sure it's still the thing of like, right, I killed someone. It's not, once again, it's not like the major was innocent, but I think it's still a thing of the ramifications. We still don't know like she said, the long-term ramifications of what she did, like to both, with herself, the death date situation, as well as with the major. So we'll see. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think a lot of stuff is going to collide in the next 2 episodes, because I caught a glimpse of the preview of, I've tried to avoid looking too much, but apparently there's going to be 2 new episodes next week. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see what goes down in both those episodes, where all of this ends up taking us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, low light to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.